My name is Dr. Alana Reyes. I'm 38 years old, a trauma surgeon in Phoenix, and a single mother to a 6-year-old boy who still believes I can fix anything with a Band-Aid and a kiss. Most nights, I'm the one standing under surgical lights, gloved hands steady, giving orders in a voice that doesn't shake. I'm the one who tells families, we're doing everything we can. I'm the one who keeps moving when everyone else freezes. But last year, on a night that smelled like antiseptic and desert rain, I was the one on the gurney instead of beside it. It had started as a dull ache low in my abdomen 2 days earlier. I told myself it was stress, gas, dehydration. I had just come off a 70-hour week, and Mateo had his spring recital that Friday afternoon. He had practiced his lines for weeks, standing on the coffee table like it was a stage, announcing, "Welcome to the rainforest," with absolute conviction. I wasn't going to miss that, so I swallowed ibuprofen, drank bad hospital coffee, and kept going. By Saturday morning, the pain had sharpened into something mean and insistent. Every step felt like someone twisting a blade inside me. I knew the differential diagnosis. I knew exactly what it could be. But surgeons make terrible patients. We bargain with our own bodies the way we tell others not to. I told myself I'd finish my shift, go home, sleep it off. I told myself I was fine. I wasn't. I remember standing in my kitchen that evening, trying to cut strawberries for Mateo. The knife slipped from my fingers. The room tilted sideways. Heat flooded my skin, and suddenly the cabinets looked impossibly far away. Mateo's voice sounded distant, like he was calling to me from underwater. "Mommy?" The next clear memory I have is the paramedic kneeling in front of me, his face focused and professional. I recognized him vaguely. He'd brought patients into my trauma bay before. There was a strange, disorienting moment where our roles felt reversed and wrong. "Dr. Reyes, can you hear me?" I nodded, or at least I think I did. The pain was no longer sharp, it was everywhere. My abdomen felt rigid, swollen, foreign. Even through the fog, I knew. Ruptured appendix, peritonitis, sepsis brewing fast. They loaded me onto the stretcher. The night air hit my face, cool and damp from an unexpected desert storm. Rain on hot pavement carries a specific scent, metallic and electric. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I had always liked that smell. Then reality crashed back in. Mateo. He stood in the doorway, barefoot in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching the stuffed T-Rex he'd slept with since he was 3. His eyes were wide, not crying, just confused. I tried to lift my hand to wave, but the IV line tugged and my arm felt like lead. "I'll be back soon," I called out, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Grandma and Grandpa will come stay with you." I believed that when I said it. In the ambulance, as they started fluids and oxygen, my blood pressure numbers flashed red on the monitor. I could feel myself slipping in and out of focus. My training kicked in automatically, analyzing my own vitals, calculating timelines. If this was a rupture, and it almost certainly was, I needed surgery fast. Every hour mattered. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers. There was only one call to make. My parents live about 40 minutes away in Scottsdale, a large stucco house with a 3-car garage and a backyard pool I'd helped finance. They'd always said they were just a call away. "Family first," my mother liked to say. I hit Dad's contact. He answered on the third ring. "Alana, we're heading out. Make it quick." I swallowed, fighting a wave of nausea. "I'm in an ambulance. I need surgery. It's serious. Can you and Mom come stay with Mateo tonight? Just overnight." There was a pause. I could hear muffled conversation. My mother's voice in the background. Gabriel laughing about something. The faint echo of a television pregame show. Then Dad came back on the line. "Hold on." The line clicked silent. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Family group chat. I opened it, my vision swimming. "Mom, we can't tonight. We have front row Suns tickets with Gabriel. We've been planning this for weeks. Call a sitter." Another buzz. "Dad, you're a doctor. You'll be fine. Don't be dramatic." A third. Gabriel had added a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No, "Are you okay?" No, "What hospital?" No, "We're on our way." Just basketball tickets and dismissal. For a moment, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. Sepsis can alter cognition. Maybe I'd misread it. I blinked hard and looked again. The words didn't change. I stared at the screen while the siren wailed above me and the IV pump beeped in steady rhythm. Something inside me shifted, not as violently as the rupture in my abdomen, but just as decisively. I was the one who never needed help. The strong one, the dependable one, the daughter who solved problems instead of creating them. And in that ambulance, bleeding internally, I realized something with terrifying clarity. If I didn't solve this one too, no one else would. I closed my eyes for one steadying breath, then opened my contacts again, not to call them back, but to start figuring it out myself. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing me inside with the sharp scent of antiseptic wipes and overheated plastic. The siren wailed as we pulled away from my house, red and blue lights bouncing off rain-slick pavement. I forced myself to focus on the rhythm of my breathing. Inhale, exhale, stay conscious, stay present. I'd seen enough septic patients spiral to know how quickly things could go wrong. My phone was still in my hand. The group chat glowed on the screen like something radioactive. I read the messages again, even though I didn't need to. We can't tonight. Don't be dramatic. A thumbs up emoji. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't hurt so much. I swallowed hard and shifted my attention to the paramedic adjusting the IV line. "What's my pressure?" I asked, my voice thinner than I intended. 88/52, he said carefully. "We're moving fast." I nodded. That wasn't good. My body felt heavy, distant, like it didn't quite belong to me anymore. My abdomen throbbed with a deep, spreading heat that told me infection was already gaining ground. I'd lectured residents about this exact scenario: appendicitis ignored, rupture, systemic inflammatory response. Now I was the case study. But my mind kept circling back to one thing: Mateo. He was still at home, alone except for the babysitter, who was scheduled to leave at 8. I glanced at the time on the monitor. 7:12 p.m., 48 minutes. I tried calling my parents again. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I imagined the arena lights, the roar of the crowd, my mother carefully applying lipstick in the passenger seat while my father navigated traffic. I imagined Gabriel joking about overtime and playoff odds. I imagined none of them wondering if I would survive the night. The realization didn't feel explosive. It felt quiet. Clinical. Data point accepted. I needed a solution. "Can I borrow your hotspot?" I asked the paramedic, lifting my phone weakly. Mine's barely connecting. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, what do you need?" "Childcare," I said, surprising myself with how steady the word sounded. Within seconds, I was searching emergency nanny services. My fingers trembled, but muscle memory from years of charting under pressure kicked in. I scanned reviews, availability, response times. There was one agency I'd used once before during a conference weekend. 24-hour coverage. Background-checked caregivers. I hit call. "Desert Rose Childcare, this is Amanda." "My name is Dr. Alana Reyes," I said, slipping automatically into professional tone. "I need immediate overnight care for my 6-year-old son. I'm being admitted for emergency surgery. The current sitter leaves at 8. I need someone there before then." There was a brief pause, then efficient calm. "We can have someone there within 30 minutes. There will be an emergency surcharge." "I understand," I said. "Triple the rate is fine." It wasn't bravado. It was math. I could afford it. Because for 9 years, I had been affording everyone else. As Amanda confirmed details, address, security code, emergency contacts, I felt something inside me sharpening. The pain was still there, but it had become background noise to something clearer. I had spent nearly a decade being the safety net, the backup plan, the quiet solution to every financial inconvenience my parents encountered. Dad's failed real estate venture, Mom's boutique hobby that never turned profit, Gabriel's endless entrepreneurial phases. Every time they stumbled, I transferred money. Every time they sighed about bills, I solved them. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was loyalty. I told myself this was what family did. But in the ambulance, staring at a blood pressure reading that kept flashing red, I realized something devastatingly simple. Family also shows up. Amanda's voice pulled me back. "Our caregiver Marisol will be there by 7:40. She'll coordinate with your current sitter and stay overnight. We'll send updates." "Thank you," I whispered. When I ended the call, my hands fell to my chest, exhaustion washing over me. The paramedic glanced at me. "Everything sorted?" "Yes," I said. Not everything, but enough." The hospital bay doors flew open moments later, fluorescent lights flooding my vision. I recognized faces immediately: nurses I'd worked with, a surgical resident whose evaluation I'd signed just last week. Their expressions shifted from routine readiness to startled concern when they saw it was me. "Alana," someone breathed. "Ruptured appendix," I managed. Probably peritonitis, hypotensive. Let's move. Even then, I defaulted to command mode. They transferred me to the trauma bed. Cold metal against my back, monitors attached, blood drawn, consent forms thrust into my trembling hand. "OR is ready," the chief resident said. "We're taking you up now." As they wheeled me down the hallway, I'd walked 1,000 times in scrubs, ceiling tiles blurring overhead. My phone buzzed again. A photo. Mateo sitting at the kitchen table with a woman I didn't recognize. Marisol, I assumed, smiling softly while he showed her his coloring book. Caption, "He's safe. I've got him." Tears slipped sideways into my hairline, not from pain, from clarity. I had almost died believing that if I gave enough, loved enough, supported enough, my parents would eventually show up for me the way I showed up for them. But in my most vulnerable moment, they chose a basketball game. And I chose myself. As the OR doors swung open and the anesthesiologist leaned over me, mask in hand, I felt something unexpected settle into place. This wasn't just about surviving surgery. It was about surviving the lie I'd been living. "See you on the other side," the anesthesiologist said gently. I nodded, and as the medication pulled me under, I made a quiet promise to myself. If I woke up, things were going to change. When I woke up, it felt like I was surfacing from the bottom of a deep black ocean. Sound came first, a steady electronic beeping, the soft hiss of oxygen, distant footsteps, then light, harsh and fluorescent, pressing against my eyelids. My body felt foreign, heavy and hollow at the same time. My throat burned from the breathing tube they'd already removed. Every inhale pulled against sutures deep in my abdomen. "Alana?" I recognized the voice before I could fully open my eyes. Dr. Patel, one of our senior surgeons. Calm, measured. "You're in recovery. Surgery went well. It was worse than we thought. Good thing you came in when you did." I tried to speak, but it came out dry and broken. "Mateo?" "He's fine," Patel said immediately, as if he'd anticipated the question. "The nanny's with him. She called the nurses' station earlier to check on you. Very thorough." A stranger had called the hospital for updates. My parents had not. The realization didn't sting the way I expected it to. It landed with a kind of clinical finality. Confirmation of hypothesis. I drifted in and out for the next several hours. Fever spikes, antibiotics, blood pressure slowly stabilizing. Every time I surfaced, I half expected to see my mother sitting stiffly in the corner chair, clutching her purse, or my father pacing with performative concern, or even Gabriel, scrolling through his phone, pretending to be inconvenienced but present. The chair remained empty. On the second day, when I was moved out of ICU and into a private room, I asked the nurse for my phone. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "You should rest." "I need to check on my son." That part was true, but it wasn't the only reason. My phone lit up with notifications, work messages, resident questions, hospital admin updates, and one text from Gabriel. "You good?" Timestamp, yesterday, 11:47 a.m. No follow-up. No call. I stared at the message for a long time. There was something almost absurd about its casual tone, as if I'd twisted an ankle, as if I'd had a minor cold. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the nanny agency app. There were photos. Mateo eating pancakes, Mateo at the park, Mateo asleep on the couch with a blanket tucked around him. Marisol had left detailed notes. Temperature normal, homework completed, mild anxiety at bedtime, but reassured. Reassured. By someone who owed me nothing. I swallowed hard and switched apps. Banking. The login screen appeared. My thumb hesitated for only a second before pressing in my fingerprint. Account overview. There they were. The transfers, like clockwork. $2,900. Mortgage, $150. Insurance, $600. Support. Additional payments scattered throughout the month. The next mortgage draft was scheduled in 12 days. For a moment, muscle memory tried to kick in, the reflex to protect, to ensure nothing bounced, to keep everything smooth. But lying there, IV line taped to my arm, surgical drains tugging uncomfortably at my side, I felt something different rising. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. I had almost died, and the people I'd been financially propping up for nearly a decade had told me not to be dramatic. I navigated to automatic payments. Clicked edit. My pulse quickened. Not from infection this time, but from the unfamiliar act of choosing myself. Cancel mortgage draft. Confirm. Cancel insurance premium. Confirm. Cancel recurring transfer. Confirm. Each confirmation screen felt like cutting a tether. There was no dramatic swell of music. No tears streaking down my face. Just the quiet, steady awareness that I was done funding people who would not show up when it mattered. On day 3, my fever finally broke. I could sit up without the room spinning. The hospital social worker stopped by to ask about home support once I was discharged. Family nearby? She asked kindly. I thought about the house in Scottsdale, the pool I'd helped pay for, the luxury box Suns tickets. I have help, I said simply, and I did. Marisol extended her hours without complaint. One of my colleagues offered to check in on Mateo after school the following week. A neighbor I barely knew dropped off a casserole with a handwritten note. Heard you're recovering. Let me know if you need anything. Support had come, just not from where I'd been pouring all my energy. Late that night, when the hallway was quiet and the morphine drip had been discontinued, I opened my phone one more time. Family group chat. I scrolled back to the messages from the ambulance. Read them again. Not to torture myself, but to anchor the memory in reality. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This wasn't me being too sensitive. This was a choice they had made, and now I was making mine. I went into settings, blocked contact Mom, block contact Gabriel. A small pop-up asked, "Are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. The room felt strangely still afterward. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. For the first time in years, there was no undercurrent of obligation humming beneath my thoughts. No mental calculation about someone else's bills. No anticipation of the next temporary crisis. Just me. Healing. On the 5th day, when I finally stood and shuffled slowly to the bathroom with the help of a nurse, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Pale. Exhausted. Stitches hidden beneath a hospital gown. But my eyes were steady. I had survived sepsis. I had survived surgery. And something else had died on that operating table, too. The version of me who believed love had to be earned through endless sacrifice. When I was discharged the next morning, stepping carefully into the Arizona sunlight, Marisol stood beside Mateo in the parking lot. He ran toward me, careful but fierce, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You're okay," he whispered. "Yes," I said, pressing my face into his hair. I was, and for the first time, I intended to stay that way. Coming home felt stranger than leaving. The house looked the same. Same pale stucco walls, same desert landscaping, same faint smell of lemon cleaner. But I moved through it differently. Slower. Aware of every pull in my abdomen, every reminder that my body had nearly shut down on me. Mateo stayed glued to my side the first 2 days, as if proximity alone could guarantee I wouldn't disappear again. Marisol helped transition things back to normal before her contract ended. She left me with a folder of notes, meal times, homework logs, small observations about Mateo's moods while I was gone. On her last afternoon, she hugged me gently and said, "He's a brave little boy." "So am I," Mateo added seriously from the couch. I laughed, but something inside me tightened. Brave wasn't supposed to be a requirement for a 6-year-old. After she left, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. Not empty, just clear. No background anxiety about the next bill my parents might mention. No reflexive calculation of whether I'd need to shift money around before the first of the month. 3 days after I got home, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I knew immediately. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. "Alana," my mother's voice trembled dramatically. "We've been trying to reach you. We don't understand why you've blocked us. This is childish. Call us back." Childish. I deleted it without responding. An hour later, another unknown number. Dad. "Your mother is very upset," he said stiffly. "If this is about that night, you're overreacting. We said we'd check on you after the game. You never called back." I stared at the phone in disbelief. I never called back. Because I was unconscious. Because I was being prepped for emergency surgery. Because I almost died. The detachment I'd felt in the hospital began shifting into something sharper. Not rage, more like clarity gaining edges. The next morning, I logged into my banking app again. Not to cancel anything, I'd already done that, but to confirm the upcoming drafts were gone. They were. 2 days later, the first of the month came and went. No $2,900 mortgage transfer, no insurance payment, silence. It lasted 48 hours. Then the storm hit. Dad showed up at my house unannounced. I was sitting at the kitchen table helping Mateo with spelling when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. Victor Reyes. Jaw tight, arms crossed. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What's going on?" he demanded without greeting. The mortgage payment didn't go through. I know, I said calmly. He blinked, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to him. There must be some mistake. There isn't. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Alana, we rely on that. The word rely echoed in my head. I was septic in an ambulance, I said evenly. And you told me not to be dramatic. He flipped over quickly. We didn't realize it was that serious. You didn't ask? That's not fair. I almost laughed at that. What's not fair, I replied quietly, is expecting your daughter to fund your life indefinitely and still calling her unstable when she sets a boundary. He shifted tactics. After everything we've done for you. I held up a hand. Let's not rewrite history. I paid your mortgage for 9 years. I covered your insurance. I financed Gabriel's failed businesses. If you want to talk about everything we've done for each other, we can do that, with numbers. He went pale. This is because of that ridiculous narrative you've built in your head, he snapped. You've always been dramatic. The word landed differently this time, not as a wound, as proof. I almost died, I repeated, steady and unblinking. And your priority was a basketball game. He opened his mouth, then closed it. You're going to lose the house, he said finally, as if that fact alone should undo me. That's a consequence, I replied. Not a punishment. He stared at me for a long time, searching for hesitation, guilt, weakness. He found none. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He just walked away stiffly, like a man who had suddenly realized gravity worked both ways. That night, after Mateo went to bed, I sat alone in the living room and allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. 9 years of financial support. Gone. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I refused to keep financing my own emotional neglect. I opened a new savings account, Mateo's Future. I transferred $2,900 into it, then $150. Watching the numbers shift felt surreal. For years, those amounts had disappeared into someone else's comfort. Now they sat in an account with my son's name attached. It wasn't vindictive. It was corrective. Over the next few weeks, word began spreading through extended family. I started receiving cautious texts from cousins. Everything okay? Heard there's tension? Your mom saying you're going through something? Of course she was. The unstable daughter narrative was easier than admitting financial dependence. But I didn't defend myself. Not yet. I knew something was coming. 3 weeks after Dad's visit, there was another knock on my door. Firm, measured, unhurried. I checked the camera. Silver hair, perfect posture. Judge Samuel Reyes, my grandfather. And when I opened that door, I had no idea that the quiet boundary I'd drawn in my hospital bed was about to become something much bigger. When I opened the door and saw my grandfather standing there, something inside me settled. Judge Samuel Reyes had always carried himself like a courtroom followed him wherever he went. Even in retirement, even in Arizona heat, he stood straight-backed and deliberate, eyes sharp beneath silver brows. At 81, he still looked like a man accustomed to weighing evidence before speaking. Alana, he said quietly, stepping forward to hug me with surprising gentleness. Let me look at you. I smiled faintly. I'm stitched together, but functional. He studied my face longer than most people did. Not out of curiosity, out of assessment. You look tired, he said. I almost died, I replied simply. He nodded once, as if confirming something he already suspected. We sat at my kitchen table while Mateo built an elaborate racetrack on the living room floor. Grandpa watched him with soft eyes, then turned his attention back to me. I heard about the hospital, he said. From Daniela. Of course. News never stayed contained in this family. It just traveled in different versions. I imagine you've heard their version, I said. He didn't smile. I prefer primary sources. That made me laugh softly despite myself. He folded his hands on the table. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you been financially supporting your parents? There it was. The question no one had ever asked directly. Yes, I said. For how long? 9 years. His expression didn't change. Amount? I hesitated only a second. Roughly 400,000. He blinked once. Show me. I stood, moved slowly to the small desk in the corner, and retrieved the binder I'd kept for years. I'd started it out of habit. Surgeons document everything. Spreadsheets, wire confirmations, receipts. It had begun as a way to track temporary help. It had evolved into something else. I placed it on the table. He opened it carefully, like a case file. Page after page of transfers, mortgage payments, insurance premiums, loan repayments that were never repaid. Renovation invoices routed through my account. His jaw tightened slightly as he flipped through. "They told the family you've been unstable since your surgery," he said without looking up. I let out a slow breath. I expected that. "They implied you've cut them off for no reason." I nodded. He closed the binder and looked at me fully. "Alana, I have presided over 42 years of civil and criminal cases. I know exploitation when I see it." The word hung in the air. Exploitation. I'd never used it. I'd used softer language, support, help, responsibility. "Did they ask you to continue paying after you were hospitalized?" he asked. "Yes." "How?" "Dad showed up here, said they rely on it." Grandpa's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Do you still have the messages from the ambulance?" he asked. I screenshotted them. Good. The single word carried weight. He leaned back slightly in his chair, thinking. "My 82nd birthday is next month," he said finally. "The entire family will be there." I stiffened. "I'm not interested in a confrontation." "I am," he replied calmly. I studied him. "Why?" "Because silence protects the wrong people." The simplicity of it hit me harder than I expected. "For years," he continued, "I've observed the disparity between how you are treated and how your brother is treated. I suspected financial imbalance. I did not know the scale." He tapped the binder lightly. "This is not assistance," he said. "This is dependency." I felt something shift in my chest, validation perhaps, or the release of a long-held breath. "I didn't give it to control them," I said quietly. "I gave it because I thought that's what good daughters do." He nodded. Intent does not erase impact. We sat in silence for a moment, Mateo's toy cars clicking against plastic track in the background. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "This isn't revenge," he replied. "It's correction." I looked at him carefully. "What exactly are you planning?" He met my gaze evenly. "Facts, presented plainly, no accusations, no theatrics, simply numbers and documented messages." "And then the family can decide what they believe." My stomach tightened, not from stitches this time, but from anticipation. "They'll hate me," I said softly. He shook his head once. "Those who value comfort over truth might, and the rest, they will reassess." The thought unsettled me more than I expected. For years, my parents had curated the narrative. Alana is independent. Alana is distant. Alana doesn't need us. If the financial reality surfaced, that story would collapse. "So you want me to bring this?" I asked, touching the binder. "Yes." "And just stand there? If you wish, or speak, that will be your choice." I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion mixing with something sharper. For 9 years, I had protected their pride. I had allowed relatives to believe my parents were stable, generous, self-sufficient. I had allowed myself to be painted as overly driven, too independent, occasionally cold, all while funding the illusion. "Why now?" I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "Because they abandoned you when you were dying." The bluntness of it stole my breath. He wasn't exaggerating. He was stating fact. "And because," he added, "if you don't establish this boundary publicly, they will spend the next decade rewriting you." That landed. I thought of my father at my door, insisting I was dramatic. I thought of my mother's voicemail calling me childish. I imagined the family whisper network already shaping the story. Unstable. Overworked. Emotional. I closed the binder slowly. "I'll come," I said. He nodded once, satisfied but not triumphant. "Good." As he stood to leave, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You survived surgery," he said. "Now you must survive honesty." After he left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, staring at the binder. For years, those pages had represented obligation. Now they felt like evidence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the truth might cost. I was afraid of what silence would. The weeks leading up to my grandfather's 82nd birthday felt like the quiet stretch before a monsoon hits Phoenix. Heavy air, still skies, the sense that something inevitable was building just beyond the horizon. Physically, I was healing. The incision had closed cleanly. The fatigue was fading. I'd returned to work part-time, easing back into trauma shifts with the cautious self-awareness of someone who now understood exactly how fragile a body could be. My colleagues treated me gently at first, watching for signs I might overextend. I didn't. Almost dying recalibrates your sense of urgency. Emotionally, though, I was bracing. The family narrative was already in motion. Cousin Sophia texted me one evening. Aunt Marisol says you've been acting different since the surgery, that you're pushing everyone away, as if I'd withdrawn from warmth instead of stepping back from fire. I kept my responses neutral, recovering, focusing on Mateo. Hope you're well. I didn't defend myself. Not yet. Meanwhile, my parents escalated quietly. They stopped by Uncle Javier's house and casually mentioned how concerned they were about me. They told my aunt that stress had finally gotten to Alana. They implied I was overwhelmed as a single mother and maybe not thinking clearly. I heard all of it secondhand, and each report only strengthened my resolve. At night, after Mateo was asleep, I sat at my desk and organized the documentation Grandpa had asked for. I updated the spreadsheet, double-checked totals, printed bank statements in chronological order, highlighted recurring drafts, 96 mortgage payments, 108 insurance premiums, 37 separate transfers labeled temporary loan, renovation invoices routed through my account. When I finished, the stack of paper was nearly 2 inches thick. I slipped it into a clean black folder. Not dramatic, just factual. Mateo wandered into my office one evening while I was reviewing the final pages. "Mom, what's that?" "Just paperwork," I said gently. "Work stuff, in a way." He climbed into my lap carefully, mindful of my healing abdomen. "Are you mad?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I be mad? "You look serious," I smiled faintly. "Serious doesn't mean mad." He thought about that. "Grandpa Samuel is serious." "Yes," I agreed. "He is. And he's nice." "He is." Mateo seemed satisfied with that and slid off my lap, returning to his Lego city. I watched him go and felt a sharp, protective clarity. Everything I was doing now was about modeling something different for him. Boundaries, self-respect, accountability, things I had learned too late. The morning of the party arrived hot and cloudless. Phoenix in early fall can't quite let go of summer. The air shimmered over asphalt as I drove downtown to the historic hotel where the event was being held. I'd chosen a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy. Professional. Composed. Mateo wore a small gray suit and complained about the tie until I promised ice cream afterward. As we pulled into valet, my hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. This wasn't surgery, but it felt close. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble floors. About 60 relatives milled around, cousins I'd grown up with, distant aunts, family friends who'd known me since childhood. The noise softened as I entered. Not dramatically, just subtly. Conversations paused for half a second too long. My mother stood near the bar in a champagne-colored dress, laughing at something my aunt said. My father adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the room like a man ensuring everything remained under control. Gabriel was animatedly telling a story to a cluster of cousins, gesturing with a drink in hand. Then they saw me. My mother's smile faltered first. Dad's posture stiffened. Gabriel's expression shifted from amusement to something guarded. I felt it then, the narrative they'd prepared. Alana is unstable. Alana is overreacting. Alana cut us off for no reason. Mom approached before I'd taken 3 steps inside. "Alana," she said coolly, air kissing my cheek without touching me. "You've been impossible to reach." "I've been recovering," I replied evenly. "We've been worried," she added, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. Gabriel joined us, smiling thinly. "You've been acting different." There it was, laid gently on the table like an accusation disguised as concern. I held his gaze calmly. Nearly dying changes perspective. He laughed lightly, but it didn't land. "We just want what's best for you," Mom said, her voice softening into performance. I didn't argue. Not yet, because I wasn't the one who would start this. Across the room, Grandpa stood near the head table, speaking quietly with 2 old colleagues. When his eyes met mine, he gave the slightest nod. Not reassurance. Acknowledgement. He knew what was coming. I guided Mateo toward a side table with other children and bent down to adjust his tie. "Remember," I whispered, "if you get bored, find Grandpa." "Okay," he said, distracted by a tray of mini cupcakes. I straightened slowly, folder tucked securely in my bag. For 9 years, I had protected my parents from embarrassment. I had absorbed assumptions. I had carried financial weight in silence. But silence had almost cost me my life. Tonight wasn't about humiliation. It was about balance. As dessert plates were cleared and glasses clinked for attention, I felt the air shift. Grandpa moved toward the center of the room, posture straight, presence commanding. The room quieted instinctively. And I realized something important in that stillness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. Because the truth wasn't volatile, it was simply waiting. The room quieted the way courtrooms do when a judge enters, conversations tapering off mid-sentence, glasses lowering slowly, attention pulling toward a single focal point. My grandfather didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I want to thank all of you for coming," he began, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. 82 years is a long time to observe human behavior. A soft ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. He let it fade. "In that time, I've learned that families are often built as much on silence as on love." The temperature in the ballroom seemed to shift. My father's jaw tightened. My mother adjusted her bracelet. Gabriel stared into his drink. "I have recently become aware of certain claims," Grandpa continued evenly, "regarding my granddaughter Alana, claims that she has been distant, unstable, perhaps even ungrateful." A few heads turned toward me. My pulse stayed steady. "I find it difficult to evaluate claims without evidence," he said, "so I requested documentation." My father stepped forward abruptly. "Dad, this isn't necessary." Grandpa's gaze didn't waver. "Victor, I assure you, it is." The silence sharpened. "For 9 years," Grandpa said calmly, "Alana has provided financial support to her parents and brother." A murmur moved through the crowd. "That's not," my mother began. Grandpa lifted a hand gently, and she stopped as if he'd struck a gavel. "I am not interested in interpretation," he said. "Only numbers." He opened the black folder I had handed him earlier that evening. Mortgage payments, $2,900 monthly, 108 consecutive months. He paused, letting the math settle. Total, $313,200. Gasps. Audible this time. My father's face had gone a shade paler than I'd ever seen. Health insurance premiums and supplemental coverage, $149,000 over 9 years. My mother shook her head faintly. "She offered," Grandpa continued without acknowledging her. "Additional transfers labeled temporary loans, home renovations, business assistance for Gabriel, approximately $50,000. The final total hung in the air when he spoke it. $412,000. Silence dropped like a curtain. Somewhere to my left, someone whispered, "My God!" I stood still, hands clasped loosely in front of me, Mateo playing quietly with a napkin at the children's table, blissfully unaware. My father found his voice first. "She insisted," he said tightly. "We didn't force her." Grandpa nodded once. "I am not alleging coercion. I am establishing dependency." That word again. Clear. Precise. "Furthermore," Grandpa said, adjusting his glasses, 3 months ago, Alana was septic and being transported for emergency surgery. She contacted her parents to request temporary childcare for her 6-year-old son. My chest tightened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. He looked down at his phone. "I will now read the response." "No," my mother said sharply. He read anyway. "We can't tonight. We have front row Suns tickets. Call a sitter. You're a doctor. You'll be fine. Don't be dramatic." The words sounded harsher spoken aloud than they had in the ambulance. Gabriel shifted uncomfortably. "That's out of context." Grandpa looked up at him. "Explain the context that makes this acceptable." Gabriel opened his mouth, closed it. My father tried again. "We didn't realize it was life-threatening." "Did you ask?" Grandpa replied. No answer. "Did you go to the hospital?" Silence. "Did you call back?" Nothing. The weight of it pressed against the room. Aunt Sophia stepped slightly away from my parents. Uncle Javier shook his head slowly. My mother began to cry, not the theatrical sniffles I'd grown used to, but something more frantic. "We didn't mean it like that." Grandpa's voice softened only a fraction. "Impact does not require intent." Then he closed the folder. "I am not presenting this to shame anyone," he said. "I am presenting it because truth matters, especially when someone is being portrayed as unstable for setting boundaries." The word unstable hung heavily now, stripped of its power. He turned to me. "Alana, if you wish to speak." For a moment, I considered staying silent. The evidence had already spoken, but something in me, something steadier than anger, stepped forward. "I didn't share this to humiliate anyone," I said, my voice calm but clear. "I shared it because I was tired of being rewritten." My father's eyes flicked toward me, disbelief mixed with something like betrayal. "For 9 years," I continued, "I believed helping financially was what good daughters did. I believed that if I gave enough, supported enough, didn't ask for anything in return, that would be enough. My throat tightened slightly, but I kept going. When I was in that ambulance, bleeding and scared, I realized something very simple. Support should not be one-directional. I looked at my mother directly. I didn't cut you off because I'm unstable. I cut you off because I almost died, and you chose a basketball game. No one laughed. No one defended them. The silence was no longer protective. It was evaluative. I don't hate you, I said quietly, but I will not continue financing my own neglect. My father's voice cracked with anger. You've embarrassed us. No, I replied steadily. I stopped protecting you. That landed harder than anything else. Around the room, I saw recalculation happening in real time. Memories being reinterpreted, assumptions dissolving. For the first time, I wasn't the distant daughter. I was the exploited one who had finally spoken. Grandpa placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Truth does not destroy families, he said softly. It clarifies them. And in that moment, standing in a ballroom filled with stunned relatives, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not revenge. Balance. The story had finally shifted, and it wasn't one I would carry alone anymore. The party didn't end abruptly. There was no dramatic storming out, no shattered glass or shouted ultimatums. It ended the way illusions usually do, quietly, with people stepping back and recalibrating. My parents left early. My father's hand rested stiffly at the small of my mother's back as he guided her toward the exit. Her mascara had smudged. Her posture, usually so poised, seemed smaller. Gabriel avoided eye contact with everyone, jaw tight, shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen before. No one stopped them. That was the part that lingered. No one rushed to defend them. No one declared Grandpa unfair. No one turned on me. The silence that followed their departure wasn't hostile. It was contemplative. Conversations resumed in softer tones. A few relatives approached me hesitantly, not prying, just present. I had no idea, Aunt Sophia said, squeezing my hand. Why didn't you ever say anything? Uncle Javier asked gently. I offered the only honest answer. I thought it was my responsibility. Driving home that night, Mateo asleep in the back seat, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, like a bone that had been out of alignment for years had finally been set. The fallout came in waves over the next several months. First came the practical consequences. Without my transfers, the mortgage payments stopped. Late notices followed. I heard through Daniela that my parents had tried to refinance, but couldn't qualify without my income history attached to theirs. 4 months after the party, they listed the house. The stucco one with the pool, the one I had paid for nearly a third of. It sold below asking price. My father took a consulting contract with a small property management firm. Not glamorous, not executive, just work. My mother started part-time administrative hours at a community nonprofit. Gabriel moved out of their new rental after realizing there was no longer room, financially or emotionally, for him to drift. I didn't celebrate their discomfort, but I also didn't intervene. Because for the first time, they were experiencing the natural consequence of dependency. Meanwhile, my own life grew quieter and fuller. The $2,900 that once vanished each month now flowed into Mateo's education fund and my long-neglected retirement account. Watching those numbers grow felt different than sending money ever had. There was no anxiety attached, no resentment simmering beneath the surface, just intention. Grandpa became a regular presence in our lives. Every Sunday, he came over for lunch. He and Mateo played chess on the coffee table, Grandpa explaining strategy with the same patience he once used in court. Think 2 moves ahead, he told Mateo once. I smiled from the kitchen. I had finally learned that lesson myself. 6 months after the party, my phone rang late on a Tuesday night. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. Alana? Gabriel. His voice sounded different, stripped of bravado. I won't keep you long, he said. I needed to say something. I waited. I didn't realize how much you were covering, he admitted. I didn't want to realize. It was easier not to look. There was no defensiveness in his tone, just something raw. I liked that you handled everything, he continued quietly. It meant I didn't have to. The honesty surprised me more than the apology would have. I'm working full-time now, he added. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. That's good, I said. I'm not asking for money, he rushed to clarify. I just wanted you to know I see it now, what we let you carry. We. It wasn't perfect accountability, but it was movement. I hope you keep seeing it, I replied gently. I will. We didn't rebuild everything that night, but something shifted. As for my parents, communication remained minimal. A holiday card arrived in December. Neutral. Brief. No acknowledgement of specifics, just a general hope for peace and healing. I didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't the same as access. One evening, almost a year after the accident, I stood on the small patio of my townhouse, watching the desert sky turn shades of pink and gold. Mateo rode his scooter along the sidewalk, laughing as Grandpa timed his laps. The air smelled like warm earth and citrus. Simple, uncomplicated. I thought back to the ambulance. The sirens, the red flashing lights, the text messages glowing cold on my screen. I realized something important. Almost dying hadn't just exposed their priorities, it had clarified mine. For years, I believed love meant endurance, that loyalty meant silence, that being the strong one meant absorbing impact without complaint. But strength without boundaries isn't strength, it's erosion. The night I canceled those transfers, I didn't just cut off money. I cut off a narrative. The one that said my value was measured by how much I could give. The one that said my needs were secondary. The one that said choosing myself was betrayal. It wasn't. It was balance. I don't know what the future holds with my parents. Maybe there will be deeper conversations someday. Maybe there won't. But I no longer build my life around their potential growth. I build it around my son's stability, my own peace, the relationships that show up without invoices attached. When Mateo skidded to a stop in front of me, cheeks flushed and smiling, he looked up and said, "Mom, you're not tired anymore." He was right. I wasn't. Not in the way I used to be, because the heaviest weight I'd been carrying had never been financial. It had been permission. And I had finally given it to myself.